We're gonna read a little bit from the book. I just first wanted to say thank you to everyone who showed up. I see a lot of familiar faces. I'm from Silver Spring originally, so it's a big kick to be here because I've been sitting in the audience. I was telling folks earlier that I saw Ted Kennedy deliver the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere here many years ago, which was kind of cool. So it's hard to make me like really nervous, and I'm kind of nervous now. So thank you all for showing up. Really appreciate it. And I guess we're just going to start with a reading so that we can get to questions as soon as possible. This is actually from the beginning of part 2. Chapter's titled Bloom Where You're Planted. In the spring of 2009, Obama's vetting team gathered, as it often did, in White House counsel Greg Craig's wood-paneled corner office on the second floor of the West Wing. In lunchtime sessions, the small set of senior aides typically shuffled through the paperwork of as many as 15 job candidates. On this day, one name conjured such searing memories from the campaign trail that it stood out from the others. Capricia Marshall. The West Wing crew considered Marshall, a staunch Hillary loyalist, to be an enemy combatant. Like many of the women who surround Hillary, Marshall is graceful, disciplined, and down-home brassy. A brunette with a chic short haircut and highlights, the half-Croatian and half-Mexican Marshall, who favored rigorous P90X workouts, went way back with the Clintons. Marshall had been one of Hillary's closest confidants in Washington since becoming the youngest White House social secretary in memory following Bill's 1992 campaign. When Hillary suspended her own quest for the presidency in June 2008, she entrusted Marshall with running her political action committee at a time when some Democrats feared that Hillary might make a final play for the nomination at the convention. Back then, the animosity between the two camps had run so deep that Hillary's face was bulletin board material in the Obama scheduling office. They had all these unflattering pictures of her, said one source who saw the display. Kind of the sports locker room mindset. Even after the primary was decided, Marshall had been in charge of sensitive projects like recruiting staff to count late delegates from the Texas Party Convention to make sure Hillary won her fair share. But no single Marshall sin stood out in the minds of Obama's aides so much as the general view that she embodied the hated Hillary land. The president's team had acquiesced when Hillary chose Cheryl Mills as her chief of staff, and with even greater hesitancy, Philippe Reines as her senior advisor. They were members of Hillary's personal staff and thus entirely within her domain. But Hillary picked Marshall to be the nation's chief protocol officer, a position that carried with it the coveted prestige of an ambassador's rank and a reserved seat on Air Force One anytime the president traveled abroad. Not only would Hillary's gal pal have a lot of face time with Obama, she'd be taking up a high-profile spot in the administration that could have gone to a friend of the president. There was another red flag on her nomination. Generally, vetting issues ran the gamut, from serious ethical lapses to DUI charges, and occasionally embarrassing associations. One nominee had been photographed with Lisa Ann, the porn film actress who played the title character in a Hustler-produced video called Who's Nailin' Palin? Marshall's problem was less lascivious than that, but troubling all the same. She hadn't filed a tax return in 2005 or in 2006. She rectified the omission in the fall of 2008, around the time it became clear that Hillary might take a job in the administration. As it turned out, Marshall was entitled to refunds in those years. Still, tax issues had beset several Obama nominees, including Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner and Tom Daschle, and the White House had little appetite for another tax cheat storyline.
As a vetting attorney from the Justice Department read a 3-page memo on Marshall aloud, White House Deputy Chief of Staff Jim Messina and Deputy Communications Director Dan Pfeiffer grew visibly agitated in their upholstered wingback chairs, as did other Obama campaign veterans around the room. By all rights, this job was a plum that should be going to an Obama loyalist, not to Marshall, and not if it meant defending yet another nominee against questions about improper tax filings. Pfeiffer in particular thought it was going to be a press problem at a time when we had been through a lot of confirmation issues with Daschle and Geithner. They reacted viscerally. Fuck no. She was a complete bitch during the campaign, and worse. Marshall's combination of experience with White House-level social planning and her closeness to Hillary made her a natural selection for the job, but Obama's aides didn't see it that way. No one in the room spoke up to defend her. Not legislative affairs specialist Sean Kennedy, who would have to get Marshall confirmed by the Senate if she was nominated, not personnel director Nancy Hogan, not ethics czar Norm Eisen, not Greg Craig, who along with Senator Richard Blumenthal had been a study buddy of Bill Clinton and Hillary Rodham in the days when Bill cooked up his mama's fried chicken to serve to guests debating the Vietnam War in the future first couple's apartment near the Yale Law School. Craig's alignment with Obama had been a major betrayal during the campaign. Aides close to Obama say it was less that they were against Marshall, that they wanted one, and more that they wanted one of their trusted own in the high-profile role. It was, "We should have our person. We need our person," said one White House aide familiar with the discussion on Marshall. It would have been the equivalent of the roles being reversed if Hillary was president and us cutting a deal that Desiree Rogers or Valerie Jarrett would be protocol officer, the aide said. When you think of it that way, it's like, why would they ever want any of us traveling with them?
The vetting process worked in such a way that by the time a job candidate reached the team in Craig's office, he or she was the only hopeful under immediate consideration. It was up or down on Marshall. If Obama rejected her, another candidate would be lined up in the same way, a process that could take weeks or months. Publicly, the Obama and Clinton camps claimed that they had put the primary behind them. But here, huddled in Craig's office, where the bookcases were still empty, and the only personal effect was a Robert F. Kennedy poster on the wall, the truth poured out. The two sides didn't understand each other, they didn't like each other, and they didn't trust each other. The president's aides didn't have another candidate in mind when Messina asked his colleagues to cast their votes, but they were certain they didn't want Marshall. One by one, each aide extended a fist with the thumb pointing down. But then Messina, a strawberry blonde Montanan, whose soft voice takes the edge off his often profane vocabulary, delivered some bad news to the team. "I agree," he said, "but this is very clearly an HRC pick and needs to be raised with the president." Typically, skirmishes over lower-level aides were resolved when either Mills or Obama's aides backed down rather than kicking the decision up the command chain. Obama's team tried to draw a line in the sand on Marshall, a proxy for Hillary. It was one of the rare occasions when a personnel fight ended up at Obama's door. This was a, quote, test case and a, quote, watershed moment in a brutal months-long fight between the White House and state over Hillary's power to pick her team, according to one of the vetters. Marshall had a secret weapon in another cousin of Valerie Jarrett, Anne Marchant, who had worked as a special assistant to the president in the Clinton White House. Marchant lobbied Jarrett on Marshall's behalf, describing her strengths and skills and encouraging Jarrett to prod the president. Hillary went to bat for Marshall, too. The White House team didn't fully appreciate the role of a chief protocol officer and what went into it, she thought. It wasn't just some glorified advanced staffer or a donor with little experience in Washington. "There's nobody better to do this job," Hillary told Obama. "She's got the experience from the social office. She's got a great touch and feel for helping organize people. She'll be fabulous." Hillary had also gone the rounds with the president's aides. "No, I'm telling you this is the best person," she had said. "You will know that I am right after you've worked with her for a month." And Hillary knew she held the trump card. "The president told me I could pick the people in the State Department, and this is my pick," she said. "So let's move forward." And if you want to know how that turned out, you can either read the book or search the State Department archives for who turned out to be the chief protocol officer. I think what we'd like to do is maybe talk for just a couple of minutes about what we were aiming to do with this book and what we think you'll find in this book, and then take your questions as much as possible. So, Amie, maybe you want to start off with what we were aiming for.
Sure. Well, I always say that I actually wanted to call this book The Phoenix because, and our agent Bridget's here and she can actually attest to that, but because I felt like Hillary Clinton had this phoenix-like rise, this phoenix-like quality. She always kind of plunges and then rises higher than ever. And so we thought of this story sort of as a comeback story. Like I always say, if I lost this campaign, I would still be in bed, basically. So how do you come back? And that was basically one narrative that we thought to do. The other thing was, how would she govern if she were president? Who does she surround herself with? These were all questions that really intrigued us.
And I think, we